How do you build an airplane that can break the sound barrier, then land on a carrier deck, pitching in the middle of the ocean? Fly fast, and you need small wings. Land on a ship, and you need big ones. This machine refused to choose. And that one impossible contradiction turned it into a legend. The F-8 Crusader. In 1952, the Chance Vought Company was staring down two words: bankruptcy or miracle. Their previous fighter had just become one of the worst disasters in U.S. naval aviation history. A quarter of them were lost to accidents without ever firing a shot at an enemy. The name Vought was becoming a warning. Then the Navy handed them a requirement most engineers believed was impossible: a supersonic fighter, yet gentle enough to settle onto a carrier deck rolling in the ocean. For years, no one could solve that contradiction, until a design team on the edge of ruin tried something no one had dared. John Russell Clark's team made the entire wing move. On landing, the whole wing tilted up 7 degrees, like a bird flaring before it lands, while the fuselage stayed level so the pilot could see the deck. The raised wing gave lift to fly slow without falling. The body stayed low to tear through the air supersonic. A solution so strange that, to this day, no other fighter on Earth has dared to copy it. Inside the industry, they gave the project a bitter name: Vaught's Last Chance. If it failed, the company died with it. On March 25, 1955, test pilot John Conrad climbed into the cockpit of the only prototype, its first flight. And he did something no fighter in history had ever done on its maiden takeoff. Conrad broke the sound barrier on that very first flight. The airplane the whole industry had written off as a desperate gamble punched clean through Mach 1, and Vought knew it had won its bet. Within a few years, the Crusader shattered record after record. First American fighter passed 1,000 miles an hour. Winner of the Collier Trophy for its wing. Then a young pilot named John Glenn flew it across the United States at supersonic speed before becoming the first American to orbit the Earth. But the very thing that made it so fast also made it one of the deadliest aircraft the Navy ever flew. 517 were lost, nearly 41% of every one built, and pilots ejected 493 times. The fleet gave it a chilling nickname: the Ensign Eliminator. The strange part, the men who survived it loved it most. Phil Vampatella once said, "It was a wonderful airplane that would really hurt you if you mistreated it, but everybody who flew it loved it." On their flight jackets, they stitched a line like a challenge: "When you're out of F-8s, you're out of fighters." And the pilots forged by that machine mattered most. One of them was about to fly the Crusader's first air battle. His name was Hal Marr. 40 years old, commander of VF-211 aboard the USS Hancock, and he had flown fighters for 18 years without ever shooting anyone down. On June 12, 1966, just as his 4 F-8s finished escorting a strike package away from its target, 4 bright dots appeared behind them. 4 MiG-17s, closing fast in full afterburner. Marr flew lead, Phil Vampatella on his wing. 4 F-8s hauled hard into the MiG-17, diving in from behind. 2 MiGs peeled off, and Marr and the last one rushed straight at each other like 2 bullets fired head-on. He pulled the MiG into his sights and squeezed the trigger on his 420mm cannon. Rounds streaked across the sky, but the MiG stayed whole. He squeezed again. Still, nothing hit. The fighter the U.S. Navy called the last gunfighter, in the exact moment it needed its guns most, simply could not touch its enemy. Marr switched to sidewinders. From about 1,000 feet above the MiG, he fired his first missile. It came off the rail, wobbled like it had lost its way, then nosed straight down into the ground. 2 weapons, 2 failures. Below him, the MiG began to run. It had been in afterburner for minutes and was nearly out of fuel. The pilot rolled his aircraft and dove for his base. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Marr rolled in right behind him, slammed into full afterburner, and closed the gap at more than 500 knots. He didn't fire right away. He waited. Only when the distance shrank to half a mile did he launch the last Sidewinder on his aircraft. The missile struck the MiG's tail. A white streak of fire tore through its rear fuselage and ripped the right wing clean off the airframe. The MiG exploded at an altitude of just 50 feet, so low that the fireball bloomed right in front of the F-8's nose, and Marr flew straight through the burning smoke of the very target he had just destroyed. But the fight was not over. He turned onto the second MiG, pulled it in front of his nose, and held the trigger down until all 576 rounds were gone. The burst shredded the MiG's wing and fuselage, but it got away. That second kill was first logged only as a probable and confirmed only later. On the way back to the Hancock, Marr couldn't contain himself. He dropped low, streaked past the deck, and rolled a victory barrel roll. 18 years of flying had just burst open in a single minute of combat. But coming into land, his hands were still shaking. He missed the wire on his first pass and shot straight over the deck. He had to come around once more before he finally set his wheels down on that deck, pitching in the sea. The man who had just scored the Crusaders' first kill came home not like a cold Hollywood hero, but like a pilot still shaking after surviving the biggest minute of his life. 9 days later, another VF-211 pilot, Eugene Chansey, did something almost no other F-8 pilot would manage in the entire war. He shot down a MiG with guns alone. No missiles, no Sidewinder, just 4 20mm Colt cannon. Of the roughly 18 confirmed air-to-air kills the F-8 scored over Vietnam, exactly 1 was made with guns alone. Nearly all the rest came from the Sidewinder. The Crusader's famous Colt Mark 12 cannon had a deadly flaw. When the aircraft was hauled into the hardest, highest G turns, the guns tended to jam at the exact moment the dogfight needed them most. The weapon built for close combat kept failing right in the middle of close combat. So if everyone fired the same Sidewinder, why were F-8 pilots so much deadlier? The difference wasn't the missile, it was how they fought. F-8 pilots trained like knife fighters. They charged in, pressed right up on the enemy, swung around behind the tail, and only then fired. At a range so tight, the MiG had almost no time to escape. Long-range doctrine taught pilots to shoot from a safe distance, where the early Sidewinders easily lost their lock. F-8 pilots pulled the trigger only when the shot was nearly certain. The gun had jammed. But the mindset the gun forced them to build, something that appears on no technical spec sheet anywhere, was the real weapon of the F-8 Crusader. Over the next 2 years, the Crusader would rack up more than a dozen more kills, one of the best exchange ratios of any American fighter in Vietnam. But the strangest thing about the last gunfighter had not happened yet. 4 years before Hal Marr shot down that first MiG, another version of the F-8 had stood between humanity and nuclear war without firing a single round. October 1962. 4 years before Hal Marr downed his first MiG, a different Crusader was screaming low over the ground in Cuba at nearly the speed of sound, its belly completely empty of weapons. This was the RF-8. They had stripped every gun out of it and packed cameras into the space instead. Its job was not to shoot anyone. It was to see. A U-2 had spotted Soviet missile sites going up in Cuba, but pictures from the stratosphere weren't sharp enough to connect the world. To get proof no one could deny, someone had to flowing low, and the F-8 dove. Just 1,000 feet off the ground, at nearly the speed of sound, its cameras firing 4 frames a second. On October 23rd, Squadron Commander William Ecker led that first run. He crossed the Straits of Florida, dropped his altitude, and swept straight over the missile sites. Then Cuban anti-aircraft guns opened up. Ecker couldn't maneuver hard, drift off his line for even a few seconds, and the whole strip of film could be useless. Tracer fire streaked white all around the F-8, and he held his heading until the last of the film had run out. Over nearly 2 weeks, Ecker's squadron brought home close to 170,000 photographs. On October 25, 1962, those images were laid before the United Nations Security Council, right in front of the Soviet ambassador. That is the strangest paradox of the F-8 Crusader. The airplane, famous for its 4 cannon, in the single most important moment of its life, saved the entire world with a camera and a flight path it was not allowed to break away from. Then its time passed. In the late 1960s, the F-8 left the front lines. The F-4 Phantom and then the F-14 Tomcat took over the decks. The last gunfighter slowly faded from the U.S. Navy. But the sky wasn't done with it yet. The last Crusader on Earth landed in December of 1999, not on an American carrier, but on the deck of the French ship Foch. The French had bought 42 F-8s and flew them for 44 years off the carriers Clemenceau and Foch. The fighter the missile age should have erased long ago outlived most of the missiles built to replace it. But the real legacy of the F-8 isn't its lifespan. It's a way of thinking. When the U.S. Navy shifted to long-range missile doctrine, the F-8 community held on to its culture of closing in, pressing tight, and fighting up close. And when American air combat performance sagged in the early years of Vietnam, the Navy was forced to stand up a new school to teach pilots to fight at close range again. That school was called Top Gun. Today, the Navy's newest carrier fighter, the F-35C, doesn't carry a gun as its main weapon either. It leans on sensors and new missiles. The technology has changed completely, but the question the F-8 left behind is still open. Is the smartest weapon really enough? Or is what decides it in the end still the human in the cockpit? The F-8 Crusader didn't leave its answer in a report or a spec sheet. It left the answer in the way its pilots fought. The gun jammed. The pilot did not. And sometimes that is all it takes to win.